He's a former NYPD police officer. He left the agency, went to the ATF, and wound up serving at the World Trade Center. He developed lung cancer from his exposure to toxins after a terrorism attack. He was involved in the investigation at the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School mass shooting, and he's here to tell his story on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Welcome to the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. In the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, we are joined by special guests talking about their experiences, the realities of investigating crimes, plus those who have experienced horrendous trauma. Police, first responders, military, and victims of crime share their stories. Hi, I'm John J. Wiley. In addition to being a broadcaster, I'm also a retired police sergeant. Be sure to check out our website, letradio.com, and also like us on Facebook. Search for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. The show was brought to you by OPPS, Operational Police Protective Services. They're dedicated to creating a safe environment, building trust, and enhancing the quality of life for their clients. They're committed to delivering quality service, safety, and security in an effective, responsive, and professional way. Get more details at OPPSprotection.com. Contact is from Fairfax County, Virginia. We have Peter J. Forcelli on the phone. Peter is a really interesting guy. Peter is a former NYPD officer who left the agency, went to the ATF, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, was dispatched to the World Trade Center and developed lung cancer. And then after recovering from lung cancer, he wound up being dispatched to investigate a part of the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School mass shooting. And he's co-author of the book, The Deadly Path, by Peter J. Forcelli and Keelan McGregor. His website is peterjforcelli.com. It's spelled FORCELLI.com. Peter, thanks for being a guest on the show. Very much appreciate it.
Well, honored to be here. Thank you for having me.
And I got to say this. Thank you for your service. I'm trying so much better to get better at doing that. It wasn't a big thing when I was policing. And it probably wasn't a big thing when you're policing either, was it?
No, we did the job. We loved the job. But, I mean, you look at how the times have changed and how the community attitudes have changed. And you look what's happening in New York City today, where they're laying a hero to rest who was shot in the stomach and succumbed to his wound. So my prayers for his family and for my former NYPD brothers and sisters who I know are suffering. And
part of the impact of that, and I don't want to get sidetracked because your story has a lot, but even though I didn't know Jonathan Diller was his name, I believe, in the NYPD, his murder impacted me greatly. The container ship crashing into the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore and causing a bridge collapse, going in the water, impacted me tremendously. It brought up so many, I don't want to say memories because that's an overused term. It brought up so many reactions from all the past traumas policing in that area. So my thoughts and prayers go to him, his family of blue and blood. And I try to remember to have some grace and dignity and patience with people because sometimes I don't have great days.
Yeah. Same here. It's rough. I mean, well, we did leave scars, and it's important to recognize that you have them, frankly, and to accept them. We're broken in some ways. It doesn't mean that we're not still very useful in other ways.
Right. Well, one of the things that a lot of my guests on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show say is that we're dinged up. We're damaged goods. If you do policing for any period of time in the United States, you're going to get dinged up. And then we laugh about it. We're okay with the fact that we're dinged up and realize that comes with that are certain things that I'm solely responsible for my reaction to them.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, look, there's some truth to the old adage that which doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I mean, there's experiences that you can pull from some of the things that we perhaps would have preferred not to have lived through, but living through them gives us, in some ways, unique insight into how to deal with other things. And frankly, you mentioned in my introduction that I was a 9/11 survivor. Look, some of the things that I saw on that day gave me the strength to later step forward and obviously blow the whistle on Operation Fast and Furious, which is another discussion entirely. But I mean, each thing that we live through, I think, helps shape us in many ways, to be better people. And even with the minor dings, as you mentioned, that we have, those experiences, they bring strength in many ways.
They do. And the old saying, like you said it earlier, what does not kill you makes you stronger. If that were totally 100% true, I should be able to bench press a Cadillac by now. The truth is I can't. But I'm stronger in many other ways. I'm willing to do things that a lot of people wouldn't do, and that maybe I wouldn't do when I was in my early 20s and early 30s. How about you?
No, without 100%, without a doubt. I mean, again, they shape us. Our experiences shape us, the good ones and the bad ones. I mean, because you learn from both. And look, there's a lot of things to be said about when you fall off the horse, dust yourself off, and get back on. Mm-hmm. And I think if you've been in law enforcement long enough, you do that quite a bit. But the thing to remember is, because I'd say one of the downfalls to law enforcement, and thank God the culture has changed, was back in our day, we were the people who people came to for help.
Right.
So to ask for help, there was some shame in that back in the day. And I am so grateful that is no longer the case. And look, giving credit where it's due, I think a lot of that comes from the heroes who serve abroad in our military, who come back with PTSD and who have, now made it appropriate to seek help, that it's bled into the law enforcement community. And thank God it has. Yeah. Because, I mean, when you think about it historically, we've lost so many more cops to suicide than we have to murder. And it's because there was a stigma that thankfully has been washed away. And now, finally, there are organizations out there that help cops recognize that, hey, it's okay to not be okay, but it's not okay to not do something about it. It's not okay to sit and suffer in silence when there's plenty of people out there who will help you. And look, I spent a lot of my career on the wrong side of that equation. I spent a lot of my career just checked out, living in my own head, being the best cop I could be, but not being the best person I could be because, I just didn't have time for my family. I didn't have time to pay attention to the great things happening around me because I was too focused on all the bad stuff I had saw that, just bounced around in my head. So actually asking for help gave me my life back. I just wish I had done it over a decade earlier.
Well, that's a great point. And last night, and we're not going to belabor this point, last night I talked to my wife, who I met years after retiring from police work, and I told her that these things that we talked about briefly, I got overcome by extreme sadness. And it comes out of nowhere sometimes, but I know what it's coming from. The main thing is I have to tell on myself, and there's things I got to do. I can't wallow around in self-pity because that doesn't solve anything.
Right. Oh, 100%. Look, I'm sure you can relate to this, and most cops listening to this story can as well. I'm sure there have been times you've been sitting in your chair or your couch, wherever it is that you sit when you're home, sitting there with the TV on, with family around, and you're not even really watching television. And you're not even really listening to the folks around you because you're in your head, thinking about the things that you've seen or thinking about that case that's waiting for you when you go back to work tomorrow or whatever, which really doesn't make us our best. For our family's sake, at least, and even for ourselves, because, you don't have those memories of the good things because you're so caught up in the job and doing the job. It's funny because I was talking to a guy I respect a lot, former NYPD Cold Case Squad commander named Tommy Joyce. And he summed it up, too. Like, even when you're not broken, even when you're not thinking about the bad things, you're so into the job, most people, that you have that fear of missing out, FOMO, they call it. Right. So you're just, when you're not at work, you're not all there because you just love the job so much. And it wasn't until much, much later in my career that I realized, hey, it's great to give your organization 100% of your effort, and you should. But shame on you if you're giving them 100% of your time. Because when you retire, what's left is your family, the people that you care about. The job's going to move on with or without you. And that's the thing that I didn't do well through most of my career, was to put those things in priority.
Trust me, I always say this. I loved the job didn't love me. And I don't mean that as a negative, Peter. We're going to take a short break, but I mean that as they have a job to do. They're going to continue on. They're going to carry on as soon as you're retired. As soon as you are retired, as soon as that door shuts, you are yesterday's news. We're talking with Peter J. Forcelli. Peter was an NYPD police officer. Then he left, went to the ATF, wound up being dispatched to the World Trade Center, developed lung cancer as a result of exposure to toxins at that site. And then after recovering from lung cancer, he was dispatched to the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School mass shooting. We're going to talk about that, his book, and much more. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back. Keep yourself and your loved ones safe by opting for OPPS, Operational Police Protective Services. They offer armed security personnel who can protect you and ensure your safety at all times. They're dedicated to creating a safe environment, building trust, and enhancing the quality of life for their clients. They are committed to delivering quality service, safety, and security in an effective, responsive, and professional way. That's OPPS, Operational Police Protective Services. Get more details at OPPSprotection.com. Again, that's OPPSprotection.com. Returning our conversation with Peter J. Forcelli on the Law Enforcement Talk radio show. Peter is a former NYPD police officer. He left, went to the ATF, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, was dispatched to and part of the recovery team at the World Trade Center. He developed lung cancer as a result of exposure to toxins and a lot of other things he had to deal with. After recovering from that, his team was part of the investigation team in the mass shooting in Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. He's co-authored the book, The Deadly Path by Peter J. Forcelli and Keelan McGregor. His website is peterjforcelli.com. Last name spelled Forcelli.com. I got to say this, Peter. You make me sound like a slacker. My wife's like, you work all the time. How did you get all this done?
No, I was lucky. I had the opportunity to work with some great people, and for some great people. So, yeah, I spent 15 years with the NYPD. Actually, I started as a housing cop. This was before Giuliani merged the three departments together. Walked the beat for a few years, got into a sector car, answering jobs, doing what cops do. Eventually made it into plainclothes. And then I was a detective for my last roughly 8 years with the NYPD. 3 of them as a general detective. And then the last roughly 5 I spent in the homicide squad. And I had really gotten my first taste of working with federal agents because, we worked a lot with DEA, ATF, a little bit with the FBI.
Right.
Because this was around the time where New York finally started to acknowledge that they had a gang problem. Because for years they had one, and then they just said, we don't have one. So it was there where I started to do federal cases, and it was kind of unique to see the difference, like with the sentencing guidelines and whatnot, that you could make putting some really bad people away for a long time. But for me, the break was I had a case where a 4-year-old kid named Joseph Dalphin was beaten to death by his stepfather. He was mentally handicapped, the child, and he soiled himself, and the stepfather changed him. And then, right afterwards, the kid soiled himself again. The guy, rather than being compassionate, went into a rage and beat the kid to death. And afterwards, like I said, the sentence was 4 years. 4 years in prison for killing a 4-year-old child was appalling to me. And around this time, we were charging felons who got caught with guns with the purpose of flipping them to build bigger cases. But they were averaging 4 years in prison for just having a firearm and being a felon. So it dawned on me, hey, I could have a lot more impact and do better cases if I left the NYPD, because I was a happy homicide detective. I loved the job and the people I work with. I just didn't like the impact. So I jumped ship and went over to ATF in June of 2001. It was beautiful. I got sworn in at the World Trade Center. We had offices there. And I really pretty much did the same sort of work as an ATF agent that I was doing as a homicide detective, which was building cases against gang members and home invaders involved in violent crime. So it really wasn't much of a change of work. It just carried a different badge. The hours were a lot better, I'm not going to lie, because back when I was a homicide detective, New York was a pretty violent place. I think when I first got into the homicide squad, they averaged 600 murders a year. So, there was no shortage of work. So being an agent, I guess the hardest part for me was taking a pay cut because, I started as a GS9 employee, didn't make a lot of money, made $49,000. Whereas a homicide detective with overtime, I made closer to $85,000, but my base pay was $49,000. So almost, notwithstanding the overtime, was just a smooth move. But that came with its own baggage as well, taking that huge pay cut.
One of the things that impresses me, and by the way, I can't recall for certain, but did New York have a 20-year retirement plan at that time?
Yes, they did.
So it was very unusual for people to leave with 15 years to go to another agency when they've got that much time invested into a pension.
Yeah, but I love the work. I love the job. They say it's a calling. I truly believe that. I think if you really, really want to be a cop, you're not looking at it as a career. You're not looking at it as just a job. It's something that is and this is a bad thing too, it's something that in some ways defines you. You know what I mean? It's a vocation.
Yes.
So, I mean, for me, I wasn't going to retire with 20 years on anyway, and I kind of knew that. Granted, it was scary because it's nice to have that option. But yeah, it was, and it's weird because it was actually, as you mentioned, 9/11. When I tell folks about what I experienced on 9/11, actually my 9/11 experience started on 9/10 because my wife and I had a falling out over finances because of that pay cut I took. We had to tighten our belts. So normally, when I went to bed at night, I'd give my wife a kiss goodnight, gave the kids a kiss. So on September 10th, the falling out never got physical or anything, but I was so upset there was no kiss goodnight. And then the following morning when I got up, there was no kiss goodbye, which was another thing that we always did. I just got in the car and drove to work. And I remember, it was mostly 3/4 of the way down the FDR Drive, almost by the Brooklyn Bridge, when I got a phone call from my boss saying, hey, a plane just hit the World Trade Center. You need to get your butt down there. And so I threw on the lights and sirens. I didn't see anything at that point because there's, even though those were the two tallest buildings in New York City, there were sky rises between me and them. And I remember as I pulled up seeing the just huge gaping hole in the side of the building. But even at that point, I didn't realize the magnitude of the impact, that it was a commercial airliner. I didn't know those things. So, but yeah, by that time, I left the house, hadn't given the wife a kiss, the kids, and just got right into the thick of it, So it was, it was a rough day, obviously, to live through that. Saw some things I would not like to have had to have seen. For example, I remember when I was up in the plaza between the two buildings, there was one point where I saw a young EMT tending to a patient. She was down on her knees tending to him. He was laid out. And when the second plane hit, I remember, after the initial shock and feeling the heat from above, I remember looking back at her and watching the color leave her body as she laid there next to him. Clearly, she was mortally injured. And I remembered turning around, looking back towards the North Tower, seeing the first person I had ever seen jump from a height, from a building. I remember just bracing myself, more so for hearing the body hit the ground than from what I was seeing. Because as a cop, I'm sure, many of your listeners have either responded to jumpers where it's a crime scene, the person had jumped, or it's someone sitting on a roof ledge or sitting on a bridge or something who really wants to be talked off. I had never seen anybody fall from a height like that before. So it was just a difficult thing. I can still hear the sound. I mean, it's just a difficult thing to process. And then when I saw the second person jump, that's when I decided it's time to leave that area and went down to street level. And it was tasked at that point with trying to help evacuate people and also to find some ATF folks and get them to a muster location. Because like at fire drills, where you're supposed to show up so they could do a head count, nobody showed up. So while I was down there trying to find some of the ATF folks to tell them where they were supposed to go, I remember seeing three of my friends from the NYPD, Vinnie Dans, John Coughlin, and Walter Weaver, who were with the Emergency Services Unit, walking into the plaza right under the South Tower. And it was seconds later that an agent grabbed my shoulder and just said one word, run. And it was because the South Tower fell. So I literally watched the tower fall on three friends who I had known for many, many years. So I ran north, ducked under a fire truck for a few seconds till I came to this epiphany that a fire truck is not going to stop the weight of a falling building, got out and ran north. And then I spent roughly 3 days on the scene without even going home to sleep, just trying to help recover people, knowing that I lost some friends, almost getting killed myself. And it was on that third morning when I got home that my wife had told me that, she sent her mother to school where my kids were going to school to bring them home. And I'm ashamed to say this, they actually waited for a chaplain to come knock on the door and tell them that I was gone.
We're going to take a short break on that note. We're going to turn that conversation in just a bit. This is the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. We're turning the conversation to Peter Jerry Forcelli in just a few moments. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Our sponsor, Colonial Metals Group, helped me with my goal of protecting my financial future. Being at the whim of the stock market or the current administration doesn't make me feel safe or secure. But having a self-directed IRA where I can safely store gold and silver, assets that have stood the test of time, no matter what the economy or the government policies are, makes sense to me. Colonial Metals Group has helped me create a self-directed IRA where I can have direct access to my assets. Let the team of experts at Colonial Metals Group help you protect your family's future. Their level of professionalism and the ability to listen make it easy for you to learn everything you need to know about preserving all you've worked for. Maybe you're just thinking of getting started, or maybe you've already in a 401k or IRA. You're thinking about your parents' retirement. Regardless, Colonial Metals Group can help. We put together a special offer for our audience. Call 800-898-1841. 800-898-1841. That's 800-898-1841. Or go online to colonialmetalsgroup.com/LET radio. Back to our conversation with Peter J. Forcelli on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Peter is a former NYPD officer. He left the agency after 15 years on the job to join the ATF and was part of the team at the World Trade Center. He developed lung cancer as a result of exposure to toxins. Then recovering after that, he wound up being part of the investigation team in Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School mass shooting in Parkland, Florida. He's co-authored the book, The Deadly Path by Peter J. Forcelli and Keelan McGregor. His website is peterjforcelli.com. It's spelled FORCELLI.com. Peter, before we went to break, you talked about 9/11, and you talked about, you were almost embarrassed to say this, that your wife, your spouse, your children are waiting for a chaplain to show up to tell them that you were killed and that you weren't coming home. And I've never been through that, but that fear was real for me all the time.
Yeah. And like I said, I mean, the sad part is I felt horrible about it because I was so caught up in the digging and the helping, figuring I had help like every other cop and fireman down there, that I never thought for 1 second to pick up the phone and call my wife and kids and say, hey, I'm okay. And the worst part for me was, our last conversation before that was an argument over money. So, I mean, for 3 days, she literally thought that our last conversation that we would have ever had would have been an argument over money. So that really made me feel like, I still feel guilty about it, candidly, that I even didn't think about it, here many years later. But, after that discussion, I took a nap. I woke up. She told me that, she confirmed that Vinny Dance, John Coughlin, and Walter Weber had passed. And then 4 other friends who I was close with, one of whom was a fireman, the other 3 were cops, also died. So I spent, some time after 9/11, grappling with some survivor's guilt because, I was close to the tower when it fell. And it was hard for me to understand, like, why am I still here and my friends are all gone? To the point where I never missed a police funeral because I thought it was, important to show respect for our fallen. And I couldn't even bring myself to go to their funerals or to anybody who died on 9/11. I just couldn't do it. And it's embarrassing for me to think back on that. But, it was actually coping with that and then actually being in denial that I had some PTSD back in those days that actually led me to put in to get out of New York. So, I was a happy agent, liked working in New York, liked the U.S. Attorney's Office there. But I put in to promote, put in for Savannah, Jacksonville, Phoenix, and Dallas, and actually wound up getting selected and sent out to Phoenix. And, that's where some things happened with that whole Fast and Furious thing. But while all that was going on, candidly, I was dealing with some physical manifestations that initially I thought I had cardiovascular disease. I didn't know what was wrong with me. And it turned out that I had some PTSD that I kind of in the back of my mind knew, but never had the courage to actually step up and say, hey, I have this and I should get some help. Hey, I came into this profession whole. You would think that I would want to have left whole, but I just didn't have the courage because of that mindset that was beat into us for years, for decades, actually. Because by this time I had 25 roughly years of service, and I was always taught that cops don't ask for help. We're the people that you come to for help.
And we had a saying in Baltimore, and by the way, they use different language and slang there than they do in New York, but the saying was, suck it up, buttercup. You're Baltimore police. You got a job to do. And you can always lick your wounds later on. And that's what we did. And I'm not saying to be proud. I'm not saying that I'm proud of it. I'm just saying that's how we handled things. Right.
Yeah. 100%. That was the culture. And it wasn't healthy, I don't think. So, but so I spent 5 years as a supervisor in Phoenix. I loved the people that I led there, but there were some things that had to be dealt with. But it was a rough time.
So you had some PTSD issues, and when did you realize that you had some breathing problems, some lung issues?
Well, it wasn't until much later. What happened was, I had left Phoenix after 5 years. I had gone to headquarters and led leadership and professional development division for a while. Then I was sent down to the Miami field division, where I was, for a while, I was the number 2 there. Then I was promoted to become the special agent in charge. So I was the head of the Miami office of ATF. And I actually was sent up to mentor a class of GS-15s at the Army War College. And my wife had just gotten over bronchitis. Now, I had no symptoms of anything, but I came down with bronchitis. And one morning I woke up and I was staying in a hotel in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and I coughed up some blood. And, I always heard that was a bad thing. And I saw Breaking Bad.
That's a real bad thing when that happens.
Yeah. So I went to I went to an urgent care, and they took an X-ray, and I heard the doctor outside the door. It's funny. It was 2 little kids seeking treatment, and myself. People were nice, but had those cheap hollow core doors. And I could hear the doctor on the other side of the door saying, "Oh my God, I can't tell this guy this. He's going to freak out." Like I could hear him on the other side, So I knew it was going to be bad news. And he came in and he kind of, he was a little bit delicate about it. He's like, "Hey, we found something, and I'd rather have a radiologist take a look at it. It could be nothing." And a couple hours later, I got a call from a radiologist saying, "Hey, we'd like you to come in for a CAT scan." They had a partnership with a hospital down the road. And at that point, I was like, yeah, thanks, but no thanks. I'm getting on a plane and going back home. So I went down to Miami, where I lived in Fort Lauderdale at the time, and they did a CT scan and then a biopsy, and it came back malignant. But I wouldn't have known that I had lung cancer had my wife not given me bronchitis that caused me to have a bad cough. So in some ways, her giving me bronchitis saved my life. Well,
she's mad at you during 9/11. You were mad at her during 9/11, but she wound up saving your life over the same thing. I'm not discounting this. More officers and firefighters have died of 9/11 related cancers and illnesses than were killed that day.
Oh yeah, I've lost. I told you, I lost 7 friends on 9/11. I've lost over 23 friends to 9/11 related illnesses. A young lady I field trained. I was her field training officer. Jennifer Meehan passed a couple years back from brain cancer. Several others, that I worked with.
Was she an NYPD lieutenant when she died or something?
Yes, yeah. Absolutely. That's you got her correct. She was a brand new cop. Field trained her. She was a great cop back in the day. We lost touch when I left, the NYPD. So, but yeah, her and several other people I work with have since passed. Because they responded there and did what we did. And, we never knew what we were walking into. And look, the reality is Christy Todd Whitman, who was the head of the EPA at the time, told us the air was safe. It turns out that they were lying to us.
Right.
You look at the death toll.
They're from the government. You can trust them. Is the biggest lie there ever is.
Yeah. Well, and people are still dying. Which is sad.
I don't want to belabor that point, but so many first responders were there that worked hard, that did their best to save lives, and then, like you, wound up with lung cancer. But many of them don't recover and they don't live, and they die very young. You were able to recover physically. What did you have to go through the treatment of the cancer and recovery?
No, I was very lucky, to be honest with you. Like, they removed my right lung, and with it, all the cancer. So, I wasn't sure at first. There was obviously tests and whatnot. So, but it was funny. They removed the right lung, and then within a couple of weeks, actually, the first major incident I had to respond to was what you spoke of, the Marjory Stoneman Douglas shooting.
That was the first couple of weeks after recovering from lung cancer.
Oh, yeah, and it's crazy because, I was back to work, and the crime scene was massive. So I had to park my car, and I had to walk quite a distance to get to the place where they were having where they were speaking to the media. And my boss is like, "You need to be there to speak to the media." I really didn't think that was the most important thing in the world. I thought maybe we should get the scene under control first.
Well, that's a cop in you talking. That you want to handle the crime scene, you want to secure things, and obviously they wanted a public information officer. And I'm not saying it's bad.
No, it's not, and I get it. But my point was going to be is that I remember being so winded from not being used to having less oxygen, to deal with, that I was like saying to myself, just don't faint. So when I was making those statements to the media, I wasn't paying attention to anything I was saying. I was just trying to focus on staying on my 2 feet. But it took a couple of years for me to get back to the point where I could go up and down stairs. But those first couple of months were tough. But I remember that scene being particularly tough. I
We're
just
going to
was
return
having
that
a hard time.
conversation in just a moment about Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. We're talking with Peter J. Forcelli, former NYPD officer, went to ATF. Is author of the book, co-author of the book, The Deadly Path by Peter J. Forcelli and Keelan McGregor. His website is peterjforcelli.com. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Keep yourself and your loved ones safe by opting for OPPS, Operational Police Protective Services. They offer armed security personnel who can protect you and ensure your safety at all times. They're dedicated to creating a safe environment, building trust, and enhancing the quality of life for their clients. They are committed to delivering quality service, safety, and security in an effective, responsive, and professional way. That's OPPS, Operational Police Protective Services. Get more details at OPPSprotection.com. Again, that's OPPSprotection.com. Returning our conversation with Peter J. Forcelli on the Law Enforcement Talk radio show. Peter is a former NYPD officer, left with 15 years on his job there, went to the ATF, was part of the team at the World Trade Center, developed lung cancer as a result of exposure to toxins there. And when he recovered from lung cancer, he was part of the investigation team at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School mass shooting in Parkland, Florida. He's co-authored the book, The Deadly Path by Peter J. Forcelli and Keelan McGregor. And his website is peterjforcelli.com. For when the break, Peter, you're talking about, man, I'm winded. Obviously, you're not breathing right. It's taking a while to come back to you. How, and I can't imagine the crime scene, for lack of better words, at the World Trade Center. I cannot even come to terms with that. And I really can't come to terms with what happened in Parkland because I've never experienced anything like that. And I'm not going to get on my soapbox about how it should have been handled because I wasn't there. However, I don't know of any cops, and I can't speak for you, that were okay with the way things were handled. And we're not going to go into great details about that. But how bad was it? How many people were killed? How many people were shot? How many injuries?
16 teenagers were shot and one coach. And it was a difficult scene to see. Because, I mean, you could see when you walk through the scene, some of the kids were clearly trying to protect other kids. So, I mean, you think about it. Here are kids who are in the beginning, the best time of their lives, who have to deal with this. And then you had some who, were so selfless in their actions. So the coach clearly tried to protect some of the kids. He lost his life. But some of the kids were literally killed shielding other children. So that scene was a tough one to process. And I had been to many, many crime scenes. Like when I was a younger cop, I responded to the Happy Land Social Club arson where 87 people died. So it's not the first mass killing that I had the misfortune of having to respond to. But this one was a little rougher on me, too, because I was also at this point kind of dealing with my own sense of mortality. And at that time, I didn't know whether or not I was going to need chemo, radiation, what the long-time prognosis was going to be. So it was a lot to kind of process, in my own head. And I did what cops do every day while I was there. It's like, what can I do right now in this moment to make things easier for my people and to make things easier for the families, because we were trying to help the families get through their tough time as well. So it was an interesting time for me, a very, very difficult time for the families and for the community there. And it was also a tough time for my agents, because a lot of people don't realize ATF agents, they don't always respond to crime scenes. A lot of the work that we do is investigative in nature. You can meet ATF agents who did 20 years and had a very productive career who have never seen a dead body. So in many ways, I was trying to get some of my folks through a difficult time for them as well, because they were coping with stuff that they just had never been exposed to before, and they were suffering. So it was a difficult time all around. But, look, we just did the best we could to pull together and to get through it, helping each other out. And it was really around this time that's when I decided to finally say, hey, man, it's time for me to get some help. So I had never formally sought any help for survivor's guilt or PTSD or anything until after Parkland, frankly, because I was getting towards the end of my career. And I knew that, I didn't want to leave the profession more screwed up than when I came in. I knew I wasn't going to leave fully intact, But I wanted to leave as best as I could. You know what I mean?
I do. Unfortunately, I do very much so. And I was fortunate. I had a lot of pressure from my now ex-wife that forced me into getting help. Did you get the kind of pressure at home?
I did. It was gentle pressure, but as I was getting closer to the end, and maybe it's because I was listening more, I acquiesced and decided, yeah, you're right. I need to get help. But they had kind of nudged me in that direction. Really, from the time, going back to when I was in Phoenix, when they knew that I would just not be myself. I was never violent or never lashed out, but I just wasn't who I was prior to 9/11. I didn't want to go to concerts anymore. I didn't like doing the things that I had done.
I still don't like doing that kind of stuff, brother. I'm telling you. I'm the guy who sits with his back to the wall at the restaurant with his eyes on the door. Now, it's much better than it used to be, but I don't like going in big crowds. I don't like having lots of movement. I don't like lots of people being around me.
Same. No, exactly the same. But I wasn't always like that. So, this is what the profession did to me. And this is what I wanted to not be when I left. So that's when I started to really seek some help. And actually, I found the most help I actually found was from a guy who teaches meditation, who was a former medical doctor who kind of looked at it from both perspectives, from the medical side, but also from the importance of living in the moment and holistic approach and just, mindfulness, which really goes a long way. In fact, as a result of the cancer, my blood pressure was at almost stroke levels. The numbers blew my mind. And, the doctors wanted to put me on blood pressure medications, but I did the meditation first. And, this guy who coached me on it, actually, I got my blood pressure down to like 110 over 70, where there was a point where they were worried. Yeah, it was great. So, there's no one way to deal with things. But the thing is to ask for help and approach it holistically. Talk to doctors, talk to counselors, and find what works for you. That's the thing that I found was the most important, is to be open-minded. Because, look, a lot of doctors just want to shove pills down your throat. And I don't think that's always the right approach. For some people, it's going to be. For me, it wasn't.
No, I agree with you 100%.
Just make you tired.
My biggest problem, Peter, is being open-minded. I'm a guy, I pray and meditate every day. And I'd be the first one to tell you, I would that's not going to work for you. That might be fine for you, for you, but it's not going to work for me. And it does work very well. And I, after all these years, have really not advanced beyond the very basics of meditation. I just don't think a lot, which is part of the saving grace for me. Learning how not to think. Yeah. No, hey, look, we are entirely on the same page. And I was a skeptic. I thought meditation was for weirdos. I'd be like, no, I don't do that. Like, I didn't think it would work, but it does. It works amazingly. But it might not work for everybody. So I think people need to find what works for them. And it's a process. And here's what I had a vision in my mind, Peter, before we go into your next chapter, because there's so much more. I had a vision in my mind of sitting in the Indian position with cross-legged and holding your fingers together and chanting. That was meditation to my mind, or doing yoga. I'm like, I'm not doing that stuff. I'm not that guy. And I don't do that at all. I want to say this. Right. If you are struggling, it gets better. Open up your mind and try some of these things. Some of these things that seem so ridiculous might be game changers for you. We got to shift gears because we're running out of time. You wrote a book with Keelan McGregor called The Deadly Path. I got to ask you, did you ever in your life think you're going to write a book?
No, I didn't. But as I was getting ready to leave ATF, I had some people that would approach me and ask, hey, what really happened in Fast and Furious? And mostly younger agents, but some agents who were on the job in other parts of the country. And that's because if you watch the news, you heard either the Republican version of events or the Democrat version of events, depending on which channel you listen to. So, look, I'm a firm believer in you can't fix what you're not willing to talk about, which is why I blew the whistle. But for people to know what really happened there, I just thought it was important to put it in writing so that folks who weren't involved can read what happened so it doesn't happen again. Because if you read the book, you'll see it wasn't that complicated, really. It was an abandonment of some basic law enforcement principles and some bad legal advice that led to that catastrophe. And, yeah, politicians embraced that as an opportunity to pull in some political talking points and to maybe, seek some additional regulations. But the reality is it's something that could very easily happen again if you weren't paying attention. So I just thought it was important to put it in writing. And so far, the feedback has been really good.
And that wound up costing a U.S. Customs officer or Border Patrol officer his life, didn't it?
Border Patrol agent Brian Terry was murdered in the Sonoran Desert trying to stop Mexican cartel bandits who were patrolling the border as well, looking for cartel mules so they could steal their drugs and sell the drugs. So Brian died a hero. I mean, impeccable man. Border Patrol guy, was BORTAC, part of that unit that saved the day in Uvalde, if you remember.
Right.
Former Marine, just a great American. And the sad part is his family never got the answers that they were looking for. In fact, the first 3 books that I got when I got my pre-order, I signed them and sent them to one to his brother and to 2 of his sisters, because they were great Americans. They were good people. And all they really wanted was answers, and the government never gave them answers. So I just hope the book brings them some answers.
And you can get more details about the book and contact Peter at his website, peterjforcelli.com. That's FORCELLI.com. Peter, thanks so much for your service, and thanks for being a guest on the show. Very much appreciated.
Thank you. Honored to be here.
Follow the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast on the Newsbreak app. It's free. And get the latest crime and law enforcement news on the Newsbreak app. It's simple, easy, and free. Just download the Newsbreak app. Then search for and follow the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast on the Newsbreak app. You can find us on Facebook. Just search for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and be sure to click like. I'd like to thank our guests for coming on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. The Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show is a nationally syndicated weekly radio show broadcast on numerous AM and FM radio stations across the country. We're always adding more affiliate stations. If you enjoyed the podcast version of the show, which is always free, please do me a favor and tell a friend or 2 or 3. I'll be back in just a few days with another episode of the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast. Until then, this is John J. Wiley. See ya.